Ladies and gentlemen, as you already said, I held a speech at a commemorating of the end of Dutch slavery June 30th last year. And I explained, and indeed, it was and is an emotional connection to this part of the Dutch history, because my husband, and therefore also my daughter, are of Surinamese descent. And what I said during this speech is that all Dutch people are connected to the shared past. So it's not only since my husband is connected to slavery that I'm interested in the subject, but in my opinion, the history of slavery is something that is part of Dutch history and therefore is part of our history. And therefore it's something we should learn more about. The Dutch history of slavery has been glossed over in our history books for a long time, both in Dutch history and in that of its former colonies of Suriname and the Netherlands Antilles. My husband's generation in Suriname learned all about our naval hero, Michiel de Ruiter. And he learned that the river Rhine enters our country near the town of Lobith. Yet he learned almost nothing about the history of his own country. I myself read a novel of Uncle Stan's cabin in school. But when I learned about the history of the Dutch East India Company, I read about glorious art, entrepreneurial spirit, and free minds. I never associated this time in our history with stolen human beings, forced to work in wretched conditions to process the sugar and coffee that funded the Dutch wealth. Dutch people of Surinamese and Antillean descent do have these memories. Memories of the victims of slavery and the heroes who fight their freedom. A collective memory passed down through the generations, through stories, songs, legends, and costumes, the language of the time. A historical consciousness that may not always be fully recognized by another part of the Dutch people. The rather extreme reactions to the debate surrounding the traditions of Black Pete in the past few years have made this painfully clear. It is a topic that divides us, whereas our shared history should unite us. And I understand it's difficult to feel a strong connection to the history of slavery if you are not closely related to people of Surinamese or Antillean or African or whatever descent and their culture, like I do. There were almost no enslaved people in this country, in the Netherlands. Our country also did not have a very powerful movement of people trying to abolish slavery like England did at the time. That made it possible to ignore the uncomfortable truth and push it out Dutch historical consciousness. But there are numerous silent witnesses everywhere when we open our eyes to see them. For example, in this city. They are on facades, in kennel houses, in museums like this museum, and in archives. When you go to the Dutch Women's Archive, Atria, for example, you can see a petition by 130 Dutch women to abolish slavery, which was offered to King William II in 1842. And there is a trail of these stories that leads past monuments to archives and heritage institutes all across the country. The many researchers present here today know about this. You have done a lot of work to trace back leads and break the silence surrounding the history of Dutch slavery. But now, I would like to see all Dutch citizens from as many different backgrounds as possible become involved, to make them aware of the fact that slavery is inseparably linked to our history. It is not a dark chapter that you can simply choose to ignore. Instead, it's one of many key themes connecting our past to the present. One that also gives meaning to problems we are currently facing. Problems of discrimination and exclusion. The belief that some are superior to others. This is unfortunately still happening in the 21st century. The American writer Colson Whitehead, who recently visited the Netherlands, wrote The Underground Railroad, and I think most of you will already be familiar with it. A book on the anti-slavery movement that carried the same name and which courageously helped many runaway slaves make their way from the southern United States all the way to the northern Free States and even Canada. In this novel, the young woman, Cora, escapes the plantation where she was born enslaved. She travels from station to station on the Underground Railroad, on the run from bloodthirsty slave hunters, but assisted by brave conductors who hide her away in safe houses along the way. Colson Whitehead is able to describe the intense fear that Cora feels, and you almost literally feel like you are in a boxcar, shaking, shivering, cold, afraid, and terribly hungry, to an unknown final destination. Cora's journey allowed the reader to become intimately and hauntingly aware of the racism that permeated American society in the 1830s. In an interview, the author drew parallels between those times and the treatment of young African Americans in the present, who are always guarded because police officials tend to single them out. The Underground Railroad takes us back to the roots of discrimination and exclusion. Whitehead used his great skills of imagination to bring the past to life, just like the photographer Nardo Brunet did with his pictures, Slaves of Holland. One of his images is shown at your invitation for today. And this is the power of art and the power of cultural heritage. It has the ability to appeal to our emotions and our senses, allow us to see, hear, feel, and smell the past, confront, confuse, and shock us, and deeply moves us. We are not being told what to think or feel, but instead we are giving an opportunity to make up our own minds and experience our own emotions. Museums and archives, in that way, have the tools and instruments available to build bridges between the past and the present, between me and the other. This is why, after June 30th last year, after my speech at the commemoration of the end of Dutch slavery, I decided to ask all of you representatives of cultural institutions and researchers to come together, to discuss how we can work together to integrate our history of slavery into our collective historical consciousness. The discussions have been inspiring, and I would like to mention 3 important conclusions. First, it's not only important to make objects like slave registers and plantations, dioramas, more visible, but you should also look at our collections from a different perspective. This will give you the opportunity to add new stories or show your collection in a different context. The Tropenmuseum is already working on this, and so does, for instance, the Rijksmuseum. And this is why I have asked the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands to examine the Dutch state collection carefully in order to find possible links to slavery. Secondly, We must always look for new ways to tell the story of slavery. Take, for example, the Amsterdam Museum, which recently included a newly made African mask in honor of Katie Cotty. This is an example of a new tradition. And lastly, we concluded that there are a lot of wonderful individual initiatives. But even better results may be achieved when cultural institutes and researchers join forces. The network Slavernijverleden, Slavery Past, NINSE, and the Museum van Wereldculturen will be coordinating these efforts. This way, our shared consciousness can slowly grow. And I would like to consider today's event another great step in the right direction. Pretty much all of the important themes are included in the program. I saw, for example, that there is a discussion about slavery and heritage in education going on in this afternoon. And I have the following to say on that topic, since I'm also Minister of Education. A recent study showed that 1 in 9 teachers find it difficult to discuss, so to say, sensitive issues in the class, such as slavery. Cultural institutions are in the perfect position to help these teachers. And we know slavery is included in what we call the Dutch history canon and is taught in Dutch secondary education. And I would like to find out in this part of history is something all young people are learning regardless of their backgrounds. And I would like to know if and how schools are seeking cooperation with museums and other cultural institutes, and if they are able to find the knowledge and help them if they need. And this is why I intend to ask the National Institute for Curriculum Development, SLO, to conduct further research into this, just like they did for decolonization and attention for anti-Semitism in Dutch primary and secondary education. And I really hope that this will help teachers to put attention to the issue of slavery in the class and not avoid it because it's sensitive. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely pleased that this shared history day was your idea and was realized by you. Keep up the great work. Even when I'm no longer a minister, and that might happen since we will have elections in March. Keep working on our ambition to include slavery in our shared history. This is more important now than ever, and I don't think I have to explain that to you any further. Help others to take that journey and trace connections to the past, because even gentle forces can be the architects of change. I wish you an inspiring day. Thank you very much.
Yes, you talked about change, eh? What do you think you have changed as a minister? You talked about elections coming up.
You know, I hope what I changed, as I already said, that this issue is, although it's a sensitive issue, it's a very important issue, and that we should not hide this, this part of our shared history. So I want to open the discussion, and I want to open the windows so that we look from a different perspective to ourselves and our common past. And I hope that the way that I talked about at the commemoration, and I talked with the directors of the museums and of science institutes, and asked them to take up this this issue and to work on this kind of initiatives. That, you know, that I showed a little bit of leadership in this issue.
You hoped you showed leadership?
I hope that what you can do as a minister, I cannot do the research myself, but what I can do is to ask you to work together, and that's what I did. And since I'm a Minister of Education and of Culture and of Science, And we are involved, you are involved in either culture as members from museums or other cultural institutes, from universities or other research institutes. And we all have the responsibility, museums have and research institutes have, to connect our knowledge to the new generation. So that's the link to education.
Shall we sit down?
I'm the one who can try to ask you to work on this. So, you know, you have to do it. But I can ask you, and by doing that and stimulate that, I think ministers are in a position to show leadership and to take the initiative. Sometimes people think that politics is only about making laws, but politics is also about management by speech, and it's also by attending issues. And I think we can see in the United States what,
shall we sit down?
What a minister, yes, or prime ministers can mean in that respect.
Yeah, there will be room for questions, 2 questions later, but first we will talk. What I want to know, what do you want your legacy to be as a minister?
In this respect, you mean?
Yes.
What I want is that, that you will continue the good work you are already doing together, and that the issue of slavery will get more attention in the school curricula, will be better, will be opened for visitors of museums. So, for example, this wonderful museum, and I loved it already since I was a kid. It's not only the museum of the rich history, but also museum that links history to the present, the past to the present, and I think the museum is doing a very good job in that respect. But also to learners about this common history of slavery.
Well, what do you think is your responsibility? You're also responsible for education. If I look in the school books, nothing has really changed.
No, that's what I just said in the beginning, and that is why I need you, and why I ask now the Dutch SLO, that is the organization that developed the materials for the curriculum and also for teachers programs, to make a program on slavery. So, and that might be helpful for teachers to be less unease to pay attention to this topic. But I'm also, I know that this kind of changes are not from one to another day. That takes time. And you need the knowledge and also the enthusiasm of people like you here in the audience.
Yeah, we read it in the newspaper that there's a lot of tensions in the classroom if we want to talk about, for instance, the Dutch slavery past. But is that really the case, you think?
I think, you know, what I learned from research is that in Dutch education, although, you know, generally speaking, I think Dutch education is quite open. If you compare it to other countries, it might be much more difficult to discuss this kind of topics. But especially recently, a lot of teachers feel uncomfortable to address sensitive issues, and that might be anti-Semitism, that might be homosexuality, and that might be slavery. Since also in the classroom we have what we see in politics and in the media, we have opposite meanings. They also are in the classroom, so it's quite difficult for a teacher to bridge these opinions within the classroom.
But I'm wondering, is that so? If I can ask in the audience, are there teachers here or people who are involved in education?
My name is Annette. I teach history in Amsterdam at a school.
And do you recognize that image that is hard to talk about in the classroom, about the slavery past?
Not at my school, no. But we have a big discussion going on at our school as well about this article in the newspaper, because personally I also think it's a whole different topic maybe, but you know, you can also say maybe 1 out of 9 teachers teaches math. You know, he is not qualified, or how do you say, educated, especially to talk about these kind of issues in the classroom. I teach history. For me, it's a major issue. But also, one other thing I would like to say is, when you look at a history book, because you just said not much has changed in the history books.
So you agree with that?
Well, my comment would be, there are a lot of other very important subjects which in history books are very small topics. It may be a cliche, but things like the Holocaust, maybe one paragraph as well in a history book. So maybe from the Ministry of Education, they should play a leading role in which topics should be educated more, and also why. And one reason would be is because there are, in society today, there are a lot of problems which go back to these topics. So maybe a lot of topics should deserve more attention.
So should there be more attention?
Yeah, you know, that's a difficult issue of education. We all want to have all the things we find important in the curriculum of schools. So as a Minister of Education, I'm also responsible not to overload teachers with this and that and more subjects.
But I think it's important. I think I know, but I agree with you. But and of course, this is a really important part of. If you talk about Dutch history, you should not only, as I said in my speech, not only pay attention to the glamorous part of it, but you should know that there is only one history that also has the other part, the part of slavery and discrimination. But what I want to say is that we are also working on a new curriculum in education, so that we do not have all kinds of different fields, but that we relate them more and more to each other, because we don't want to overload the curriculum. And I would ask teachers, you and other teachers, to be involved in this discussion, because I'm glad that we in the Netherlands do not have the policy that I am saying what you have to teach, but you are the professional. So you have to do that and I have to support you. And that's what I can do with the SLO initiatives, what I can do with to support the curriculum developments, and what I can do to stimulate museums, scientists and others to bring all their knowledge together. And that's why we are here, I think. This is not about the curriculum in school, but this is about how we can join forces in bringing all the materials and all the knowledge we have much more together. And what's the role of museums, what do you think, when it comes to the slavery past and bringing it over?
The role of museums is to open their materials, to make them visible for the public, but also to do it in a connected way, and not only as a museum all separately together, but to integrate this history as part of their collection. And you know, we have had these discussions before in the Netherlands about a national historical museum.
Yeah, should there be a national slavery museum, you think?
No, yeah, that's I think that's
difficult question.
No, I think maybe there should be one, but as I said also in my speech, we do not have a history like in England and in the US with much stronger abolition movements.
Yeah, but still there's a strong history in Holland.
Yeah, I know, but you know, there you cannot erect a museum for every important subject, I think. So all over, I think the chance that there will be a slavery museum in the near future in the Netherlands is not is not very great, I think, because if I see what's going on around me in politics, in society, in the history of also the National Museum, I think we better invest our inner energy now, today, in working together and collecting all the materials we have. And we have very important museums, like this museum, like the Rijksmuseum, the Amsterdam Museum, and all other kinds of musea who have a lot of information, who have a lot of materials. So I would urge you to link all these informations and all the collections much more to each other.
But do we see enough of this past in the museums?
No, not enough. That's the problem, and it's not related to each other. If you are looking for it, maybe you can find it. But if you are just a visitor that has not that much information, and you visit any kind of museum in the Netherlands, I think it's very difficult to find it. So my question to you is, how can we put much more all the information to the forefront and to present it much more directly to the audience, and to do it in a much better interrelated way. So not only one collection or one museum, but to show it all together. And
you want it to be more integrated.
That is the most important part, and most important part is not a building. The most important part is the story and the collection.
Yeah, there's a question. Gloria Wecker.
Minister Bussemaker, you just said something in passing which I thought was significant. You said that unlike the UK, we don't have a strong movement here in the Netherlands of people who opposed slavery. That in itself is a significant statement, because we should ask ourselves why that was the case. There's a significant story to be told there about our self-representation. That is to say, our representation of ourselves is that we were reluctant imperialists. And if we were imperialists, those people who were under our tutelage were incredibly lucky to have us as their colonizers. So there is a story to be told there, and I don't think it's a very good approach, because we didn't have a strong anti-abolition movement. There's no story to be told. There is a significant story to be told. And so how can anyone be against working together, joining forces, etc.? But this interjection, this supposition that is present in your answer really needs more reflection, I think.
But let me clarify that I agree with you that the question and the issue that we did not have such a strong abolition movement as in other countries needs some reflection. I agree with you, of course. And that's part of our story, also about the story of our self-reflection and self-representation. So that should be an issue. But it was only a clarification why there are much stronger supporters, I think, in other countries, as far as I know, to erect a museum of slavery than was the case in the Netherlands, at least in the past. This has not really been a big issue in the Netherlands, as far as I know. And I think it was in the UK, so it's not a political opinion. It's more a clarification about where we stand, where we are now standing in the Netherlands.
I want to ask something else. Lindsay is very important when it comes to our slavery past. And what I want to know is, what is the responsibility of the Dutch government when it comes to structural funding of an organization as Lindsay?
We have a responsibility, and
Structural,
therefore,
I mean, eh?
Yeah, but NINSE is a part of the cultural infrastructure, and that means that NINSE has to perform like all other cultural institutions that are part of our funding structure. And that means that you get money for 4 years, and so also NINSE receive money for 4 years, and that's already much more than my predecessor did, and it's similar and common to all other comparable cultural institutions. And my colleague Lodewijk Asscher from Social Affairs and Integration, he created more money also for special program these days. And that's where we are standing now.
Yeah, because when I think about change, and I think it should be more than 4 years. It should be embedded.
But you know, let's not have the discussion here the whole day about one building and one structure of financing. Let's have the discussion about what has to be done in collaboration, and what the possibilities and the challenges are. Yeah. And if there are very good ideas, we can have a discussion. But I'm very glad that in a situation where it was very difficult, where there were a lot of cutbacks made by my predecessor, and NINSE did not get any money at all anymore, that I had the possibility to create money for culture for 4 years. But I do not have money for NINSE as a societal project. If we want that, we have to discuss that.
So your main...
I see the chairman of NINSE sitting there, and you have been with me not that long ago, and we will have a meeting with my colleagues, among them Lodewijk Asscher, to see what's possible. But we first need to have the discussion. Is NINSE a cultural institute? Is it erected for the commemoration of the end of slavery? Or do we want to have a knowledge institute together with museums and scientists, etc.? But I would urge you to start a discussion from the content and the challenges for the future, and not only about the financial and institutional infrastructure.
The main message
I know it's important for you.
The main message is collaboration. There's only room for one short question, and then, yes. Jennifer Tosh, that's her, yeah. The Black Heritage Tours. Yes, we need a microphone.
Oh, thank you. I just want to expand, I think, the idea of the representation not just focused on slavery, actually, because African history, Black history did not begin with slavery. And I think that we are so focused on just that piece of the story that we're leaving out a much bigger narrative that could be even more inclusive of showing that the history, this intertwined history, is bigger than just slavery. That the Black presence, as I'm sure Mark Ponte will talk about later, was earlier than when slavery became institutionalized. So I think there's a lot more that we can even glean from the archives, from the museums that could bring that into focus, which is one of the things I really love about the Smithsonian Museum, is that it's not just about one story.
Yes. Short reaction?
But I think that's a very good addition, and can enrich the storytelling, and also to find new perspectives. So I think this is the kind of discussions we should, dialogues, we should have today.
Yeah, we will have those dialogues. Thank you very much, Jet Bussemaker, and good luck with your career after being a minister.
Thank you.
Applause.
You never know what happens.
You never know, you never know, we never know.